The Radio Operator's Dilemma. March 12, 1943. 400 nautical miles west of Ireland, North Atlantic, Oberfunkmacht. Klaus Richter's hand trembles above the Morse key as U-507 pitches through another swell. The submarine's radio room, barely larger than a coffin, stood on end, reeks of diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of seawater that seeps through every seal. His pocket watch sits open beside the transmitter, its second hand sweeping toward the moment Kapitänleutnant Weber ordered him to break radio silence. 18 seconds. That's his window. 18 seconds to encode the convoy position, transmit to BDU headquarters in Lorient, and shut down before the Allied direction finders can triangulate his signal. The Funkmeister drilled it into every operator during training. 20 Sekunden maximum. "20 seconds, or you paint a target on your boat's hull." But Richter knows something his instructors didn't tell him. Something whispered in the crew quarters after lights out, passed between boats during rare mid-ocean rendezvous. The British have something new, something faster. Boats are vanishing, not from depth charges or aircraft, but from coordinated attacks that seem to materialize from nowhere within minutes of a transmission. The watch reads 2147 hours. Time to transmit. He depresses the key and begins tapping. FT1842, grid coordinates for the convoy spotted at dawn. His free hand counts silently. 1, 2, 3, while sweat traces down his spine despite the freezing air. Above him, the Atlantic groans against U-507's pressure hull. Somewhere in the darkness, destroyers might already be turning toward his signal. 6 seconds. 7, 8. What Richter doesn't know, what he cannot know, is that 800 miles away, in a fortified bunker beneath Liverpool's Western Approaches Command, 3 rotating aerials have already captured his transmission. The oscilloscope trace is clean and sharp. The bearing is precise. It took 3 seconds. By the time Richter releases the key at 17 seconds, 3 under his limit, sweating with relief, his submarine's death warrant is already being plotted on a chart table. The hunter has become the hunted, and the weapon that sealed his fate was born from desperation, genius, and the unforgiving mathematics of electromagnetic waves. The Invisible Leash, June 1940. Bletchley Park, Buckinghamshire, England. The convoy system was bleeding Britain dry, one merchantman at a time. Every night, German U-boats surfaced under cover of darkness, transmitted position reports to Admiral Dönitz's headquarters, and received updated attack coordinates in return. Traditional radio direction finding, the peacetime technology that took cross bearings from multiple stations to plot a transmitter's location, was too slow, too imprecise. By the time operators at widely separated stations compared notes and calculated a fix, the U-boat had long since changed course. Commander Peter Ackroyd stood before a wall-sized map in the Admiralty's Operational Intelligence Center, colored pins marking known and suspected U-boat positions. Red pins clustered like blood drops along the convoy routes. Each represented a potential wolf pack forming up for coordinated attack. "We're blind," he said to the young physicist beside him. Dr. Robert Dippy adjusted his thick-framed glasses and studied the map with the detached curiosity of a man who saw mathematical problems rather than maritime casualties. How long does a typical U-boat transmission last? 30 to 45 seconds for standard position reports. Less if they're cautious. And how long for current DF stations to obtain a fix? Aykroyd's jaw tightened. Best case, 5 minutes, usually longer. Dippy pulled a worn notebook from his jacket and began sketching. The problem isn't the physics, it's the methodology. Traditional direction finding uses separate stations taking bearings independently, then comparing results. But what if we use multiple aerials at a single station, comparing the phase difference of the received signal as it arrives at each aerial? Imagine 3 men standing in a field, Dippy continued, warming to his explanation. A church bell rings in the distance. The man closest to the church hears it first. The man farthest away hears it last. By measuring the tiny time difference, we're talking microseconds, you can calculate exactly which direction the bell is located. Now replace the men with rotating aerials, the bell with a radio transmission, and the time difference with electrical phase angles. Aykroyd stared at the physicist. How long would this take? With proper equipment and trained operators. Dippy checked his calculations. 3 seconds, maybe 4. 3 seconds. Aykroyd repeated slowly. He turned back to the map, visualizing the implications. A U-boat surfaces to transmit. Within seconds, not minutes, its position is known. Destroyers can be vectored toward the contact immediately. Aircraft can be scrambled while the submarine is still on the surface, vulnerable. The hunter becomes the prey. Can you build it? The theory is sound. The engineering is complex but achievable. I'll need resources, technicians, access to RAF radar development teams. You'll have whatever you need. Aykroyd moved closer to the map, his finger tracing the convoy routes. How soon? 6 months. Perhaps 8 if we encounter. You have 3. Every day we delay, we lose ships. Every week we lose sailors. He turned to face the physicist. This war will be won or lost in the Atlantic, Doctor. Your 3-second miracle might be the difference. The Adcock Array, November 1940. Prestwick, Scotland. The first prototype looked nothing like the sleek, classified equipment that would later turn the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic. Four vertical masts, each 20 feet tall, stood in a perfect square formation on the windswept airfield. Between them, a web of copper wire caught the weak November sun like frozen spider silk. In the center, housed in a wooden hut that leaked rain and amplified the constant shriek of the Scottish wind, Robert Dippy and his team of engineers huddled around their creation. Flight Lieutenant James Hanning operated the controls while Dippy monitored the oscilloscope. The screen showed a green phosphorescent line that jumped and wavered with each burst of static. They were listening to German weather broadcasts from occupied Norway, reliable regular transmissions perfect for testing. The phase difference should manifest as amplitude variations across the aerials, Dippy muttered, more to himself than Hanning. When the signal arrives perpendicular to one pair of masts, those aerials receive maximum amplitude. The orthogonal pair receives minimum. The ratio gives us bearing. Still getting hash, Hanning said, adjusting a dial. The oscilloscope trace danced wildly. Atmospheric interference. Try increasing the gain on the... The trace suddenly sharpened. The chaotic noise resolved into a clear, directional pattern. Hanning's hand froze on the dial. That's a clean signal, he breathed. Bearing approximately 045 degrees. Dippy pulled out a compass and chart, hands moving with practiced precision. Norwegian coast, near Stavanger. That's exactly where the weather station operates. He looked up, allowing himself a rare smile. It works. How long did that take? Dippy checked his stopwatch. 4 seconds from initial detection to confirmed bearing. Over the following weeks, they refined the system. The wooden hut was replaced with a concrete bunker. The oscilloscope was upgraded to a specialized cathode ray display that showed bearing as a visual angle rather than abstract waveforms. They trained operators to read the displays instinctively, translating the green traces into precise compass bearings without conscious thought. The system was designated HFDF, High Frequency Direction Finder. Sailors, with their gift for abbreviation, quickly shortened it to Huff-Duff. By December, 3 operational stations were tracking German naval traffic along the Norwegian coast. By January 1941, the network had expanded to cover the western approaches. The operators became faster with each shift, their eyes learning to read the cathode traces like sailors reading the sea. A spike here meant a transmission from the northeast. A dip there indicated southwest. Within weeks, experienced operators could call out bearings before the automatic recorder had finished its calculations. But the real breakthrough came in February 1941. When they successfully installed a compact Huff-Duff set aboard HMS Culver, a destroyer escort. For the first time, individual ships could detect and track U-boat transmissions without relying on shore stations. The implications were staggering. Every escort vessel became a mobile hunting platform. Every convoy carried its own electronic sentinel. The Germans noticed ships disappearing. U-boats reporting convoy contacts would find destroyers closing on their position with impossible speed, but they attributed it to improved radar, better code breaking, perhaps even betrayal. The truth that every transmission painted an invisible target, that the Allies needed only 3 seconds to mark them for death, remained hidden beneath layers of operational secrecy. The North Atlantic Trap, May 1943. HMS Starling. Western approaches. Captain Frederick Walker stood on the bridge of his destroyer, binoculars raised toward the empty horizon. Somewhere beneath those grey-green swells, a U-boat was hunting his convoy. He knew because the Huff-Duff station at Liverpool had triangulated 3 separate transmissions over the past 4 hours. The first had been brief, 12 seconds. The second even shorter, 8 seconds. The third, just moments ago, had lasted only 6 seconds. The German operator was learning, getting cautious, but it didn't matter. "Signal from Liverpool, sir," the radio operator called out. "New bearing, 023 degrees, range estimated 40 nautical miles, confidence level high." Walker lowered his binoculars and studied the chart. 3 bearings, plotted from 3 separate transmissions, formed a rough triangle on the map. The U-boat was somewhere inside that triangle, probably running submerged now, but it would surface again tonight to recharge batteries. They always did. Helm, come to 023, increase speed to 20 knots. HMS Starling's deck thrummed as the engines responded. Behind them, 3 more destroyers of the escort group turned in formation, moving toward the contact with predatory efficiency. This was the new mathematics of anti-submarine warfare: position, speed, time to intercept. Cold calculations that added up to hot death for submariners. Walker had sunk 3 U-boats in the past month using Huff-Duff intelligence. Each kill followed the same pattern. Detect the transmission, plot the bearing, close to attack range while the submarine was still surfaced or recently submerged, saturate the area with depth charges. Simple, methodical, effective. The sea was calm today, almost flat. Perfect conditions for ASDIC detection once they closed to within a few miles. Walker checked his watch again. If the U-boat followed standard operating procedures, it would surface around 0200 hours to transmit its end-of-day report and recharge batteries. That gave him 7 hours to position his hunters. "Sir, the convoy?" his first officer asked. "Signal HMS Wren to assume escort command. We're hunting." Walker's voice was flat, emotionless. He'd lost count of how many merchant ships he'd seen torpedoed, how many sailors he'd watched slip beneath the waves coated in burning oil. Every U-boat sunk was payback. Every depth charge that found its mark was justice for men who died screaming in the darkness. The officer hesitated. "Standing orders say we maintain convoy escort at all times." "Standing orders were written before Huff-Duff." Walker turned to face him. "We know where that U-boat is. We know it will surface tonight. If we let it go, it calls in the wolf pack, and we lose half the convoy. If we kill it now, we save 30 ships and 300 lives." He paused. "Signal HMS Wren. We're hunting." The German response: BDU headquarters, Lorient, France. Same day, Korvettenkapitän Hans-Georg Schultz stood before the plotting table in the U-boat command center, studying the growing list of losses with mounting concern. 7 boats in the past 2 weeks, not sunk by aircraft, not destroyed by convoy escorts in the heat of battle, simply vanished. Disappeared hours after transmitting position reports, with no distress signals, no survivors, no explanation. Admiral Dönitz entered the room, his uniform crisp despite the late hour. The Lion, they called him, the architect of the Wolfpack strategy that had brought Britain to its knees. But even the Lion looked troubled now. "Analysis?" Dönitz demanded, moving to the chart. Schultz pointed to the marked positions. U-223 lost on May 3rd. Last transmission at 1847 hours, 18 seconds duration. Attacked approximately 2 hours later according to survivor testimony from a merchant ship that witnessed depth charging in that grid square. Radar. Possible. But the attack occurred at night in heavy weather, poor conditions for aircraft radar. Continue. U-454 lost May 7th, last transmission 22 seconds. Destroyers appeared within 90 minutes. U-507, he paused. U-507 transmitted yesterday, 17 seconds. We received reports from U-191 of destroyer activity in that area within 45 minutes. Dönitz's jaw tightened. They're tracking our transmissions. That's impossible, Herr Admiral. Traditional direction finding requires multiple stations coordinating bearings. The time required is apparently less than we calculated. Dönitz moved closer to the map, his eyes scanning the Atlantic approaches. What if they've developed a new system? Faster, more accurate? The physics don't support it, sir. Radio waves travel at the speed of light, yes, but triangulation requires multiple receiving stations, data comparison, mathematical calculation. Even with the fastest equipment, that's a 5-minute process minimum. Then explain the pattern. Dönitz's voice was cold. 7 boats, all lost shortly after transmitting, all in areas where destroyers appeared with impossible speed. Schultz had no answer. The physics were clear, the mathematics were sound, and yet submarines were dying with clockwork regularity, and the only common factor was radio transmission. New standing order, Dönitz said finally. All boats are to limit transmissions to 15 seconds maximum, essential traffic only. Weather reports can wait. Status updates are secondary to survival. He turned to face his operations officer. And instruct the Funkmeister to develop new procedures. Shorter message formats, pre-coded situation reports, whatever it takes to get transmission time below 10 seconds. Yes, Herr Admiral. After Dönitz left, Schultz returned to the plotting table. He pulled out a compass and began drawing circles around the U-boat loss positions, each circle representing the maximum distance a destroyer could travel in the time between transmission and attack. The circles overlapped, creating a web of intersecting arcs across the western approaches. Somewhere in that web was the answer. Some new technology, some British innovation that turned radio transmissions into death sentences. But without knowing the mechanism, how could they counter it? The U-boat crews were fighting an invisible enemy, dying from wounds they couldn't see, delivered by weapons they didn't understand. He thought about Klaus Richter, the young radio operator on U-507. Schultz had trained Richter personally, had drilled into him the importance of speed and precision. "20 seconds or less. Keep the transmission tight, encode properly. Don't give the enemy time to find you. But what if 20 seconds was 19 seconds too long? The mathematics of death, U-507. That night. Klaus Richter surfaced with the boat at 0203 hours, grateful for the fresh air that flooded through the conning tower hatch. The night was overcast, no moon, visibility less than 2 miles, perfect conditions for a surface run. The diesels coughed to life, their steady rumble replacing the electric motor's whine. He was back in his radio room within minutes, encoding the evening report. Position, fuel status, torpedo count, weather observations. Under the old format, it would take 40 seconds to transmit. He'd compressed it to 9 seconds, 9 seconds of exposure, 9 seconds to send vital intelligence to BDU, 9 seconds that might bring destroyers racing through the darkness. His hand hovered over the key. Through the thin hull, he could hear the diesels, the slap of waves against the ballast tanks, the distant cry of a seabird. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. The sounds of a submarine doing exactly what submarines were designed to do, but nothing felt normal anymore. "Funkram, status." The Capitan's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ready to transmit, Herr Kapitän Leutnant. 9 seconds. Make it 7. New orders from BDU. 15 seconds maximum, but 7 is better." Richter looked at his encoded message and began cutting. Weather report. Gone. Fuel status could be approximated. He stripped the message to bare essentials. Position, torpedo count, contact report negative. 4 groups, 7 seconds if he transmitted at maximum speed. He took a breath, pressed the key, and began tapping. The Morse was clean, fast, professional. His instructors would have been proud. POSITION. 4 groups, 7 seconds. He released the key and immediately shut down the transmitter, killing the circuits before the vacuum tubes could even cool. Done. Clean. Fast. He sat back and waited for the feeling of relief that always followed a successful transmission. It didn't come. Instead, he felt only a hollow dread, the certainty that somewhere someone had heard him. Someone was plotting, someone was coming. "Transmission complete," he reported through the intercom. 7 seconds. "Good work, Richter." "Prepare for dive in 10 minutes. 10 minutes. 600 seconds. Richter stared at his darkened transmitter and did the mathematics. If the British had a new direction-finding system, and he was certain they did, they detected his signal within seconds. Call it 5 seconds to confirm the bearing, another 30 seconds to pass the information to nearby escort vessels, add 5 minutes for a destroyer to come about and build speed, another 10 minutes to close to within a few miles. "16 minutes from transmission to attack. They had 10 minutes to dive and clear the area. It wouldn't be enough. "Herr Kapitän Leutnant," he said into the intercom, keeping his voice steady, "recommend immediate dive. I believe we should not wait." "We need to recharge batteries, Richter. 10 minutes won't make a difference." 10 minutes will make all the difference, Richter thought, but he didn't argue. You didn't argue with the Capitan. You followed orders, trusted in training, believed in doctrine, even when doctrine was written by men who'd never heard of 3-second direction finding. He sat in his tiny compartment and listened to the diesels rumble, the sound that meant life, that meant charging batteries and making oxygen and preparing for the next day's hunt, the sound that would bring death racing through the darkness. 8 minutes passed. 9. All hands, prepare to dive. Clear the lookout's scream cut through every other sound. "Destroyer, bearing 085, range 3 miles. She's coming right at us." The alarm shrieked through the boat. The diesels cut out with a strangled cough. Boots pounded on metal as men raced to diving stations. Richter grabbed the radio set to secure it, his hands moving on trained instinct, while his mind reeled with the impossible mathematics. 3 miles. The destroyer was 3 miles away. That meant she'd started her turn 11 minutes ago. 11 minutes from his transmission to visual contact. They detected him, plotted him, and positioned themselves to intercept in less time than it took to boil water for coffee. U-507 nose down, the deck tilting sharply as the diving planes bit into the water. Richter heard the roar of water flooding the ballast tanks, felt the pressure change in his ears as they dropped below the surface. 50 meters, 70, 100. The first depth charge detonated at 120 meters. The world became violence. The hull screamed as pressure waves compressed it. Light bulbs shattered in cascades of glass. Richter was thrown against the bulkhead, his shoulder striking the radio set with bone-jarring force. Around him, the boat groaned like a living thing in pain. Another explosion. Closer. The lights went out. Emergency lighting flickered on, painting everything in red shadows. Someone was screaming in the forward compartment. Water was spraying from a cracked pipe, the high-pressure jet visible even in the dim light. "Damage report!" The Capitan's voice, still steady despite everything. "Forward torpedo room taking water. Stern planes not responding. Depth now 150 meters and falling." They were sinking. The destroyer above them had found their scent like a shark tasting blood, and now it would harry them down into the crushing depths where the pressure hull would implode like a crushed can. Richter clutched his radio set, the device that had killed them all, and thought about his calculations. 7 seconds to transmit, 3 seconds for the British to detect and plot his bearing, 16 minutes from transmission to attack. He'd been wrong about one thing. They hadn't needed 3 seconds. They'd probably marked U-507's position in less than 2. The other minute was just the time it took for the Hunter to close in for the kill. The Hunter's calculus, HMS Starling. Same moment. Frederick Walker watched the depth charge explosions through his binoculars, counting the seconds between detonations. His Huff-Duff operator, a young able seaman named Collins, had detected the U-boat's transmission at 0203 hours. The bearing had appeared on the cathode display within 2 seconds. By 0204, Walker had the submarine's position plotted and was bringing Starling about for an intercept course. The U-boat had stayed on the surface for exactly 9 minutes after transmitting. 9 minutes to charge batteries, make oxygen, run the diesels. 9 minutes that cost them everything. Walker's ASDIC operator called out range and bearing with mechanical precision. "Contact bearing 087, range 1,200 yards, moving left to right, slow." Depth approximately 140 meters. Maintain contact. Prepare depth charge pattern Delta 7. Starling surged forward, her bow cutting through the dark water like a blade. Behind Walker, the depth charge crews worked with practiced efficiency, setting detonators for 150 meters, rolling the steel drums into position on the stern racks. Each charge contained 300 pounds of amatol explosive. Each one created a pressure wave capable of crushing a submarine's hull at close range. Range 800 yards. Walker checked the plot. The U-boat was diving deeper, trying to get below the thermocline, where temperature differences might scatter the ASDIC signal. Standard evasion doctrine. It wouldn't work. Starling's ASDIC was too new, too sensitive, and Walker had been hunting submarines for 3 years. He knew every trick, every desperate maneuver. Range 400 yards, contact firm. Fire on my mark. Walker watched the stopwatch, calculating the time for Starling to pass over the submarine's position. 3, 2, 1, fire! The depth charges rolled off the stern in rapid succession, splashing into the water like stones skipping across a pond. Walker counted silently. Each charge would take approximately 30 seconds to reach detonation depth. 30 seconds while the U-boat crew below held their breath and prayed. The first explosion sent a column of water 50 feet into the air. The second followed a heartbeat later, closer to the submarine's position. Then the third, fourth, fifth, a rippling barrage that turned the sea white with foam and spray. "ASDIC contact lost, sir. Too much turbulence." Walker waited. The sea settled. Foam dissolved back into dark water. In the silence, every man on Starling's bridge listened for the sounds that would confirm a kill. Breaking bulkheads, rushing air, the metallic shriek of a dying submarine. Nothing. "Resume search pattern." "He's wounded, but alive." For the next 3 hours, Starling played cat and mouse with the damaged submarine. The U-boat would try to creep away, running silent on electric motors. Starling would detect the movement on ASDIC and attack again. Depth charges rained down through the darkness, each pattern bracketing the submarine's position more tightly. At 05:17 hours, the end came. A massive explosion erupted from below, not from a depth charge but from within the submarine itself. Either the pressure hull had finally collapsed, or the crew had scuttled the boat to avoid capture. The ASDIC operator reported breaking up noises, the distinctive sound of a submarine dying, bulkheads collapsing, machinery tearing free from its mounts. Oil and debris floated to the surface, a few pieces of wood, a life jacket, no survivors. Walker lowered his binoculars and turned to his first officer. "Log it. U-boat destroyed at 05:17 hours, position 51 degrees 23 Den 12 deg 47 to W." Method: Huff-Duff detection followed by depth charge attack. He paused, thinking about the men who'd just died below. Men who'd probably never known what killed them, who'd followed their doctrine perfectly and died anyway. 7-second transmission. That's all they gave us. 7 seconds, and we had them cold. The first officer noted the details in the log. 7 seconds. It would be important for the analysts back in Liverpool. Every data point mattered. Every kill refined the hunting doctrine. Collins, the Huff-Duff operator, spoke quietly from his station. "Sir, if they'd stayed silent, we'd have never found them." "But they couldn't stay silent," Walker replied. "Submarines are only useful if they can report what they find. They have to transmit, and every transmission—" He gestured at the oil slick spreading across the water. 3 seconds to detect, 14 minutes to kill. That's the new mathematics of this war. The Tipping Point, June 1943. Western Approaches Command, Liverpool. The plotting room was 3 stories underground, protected by 30 feet of reinforced concrete and surrounded by anti-aircraft batteries. On the main wall, a massive map of the North Atlantic dominated the room, covered in colored pins and grease pencil marks tracking convoys, U-boats, and surface units. Admiral Max Horton stood before the map, studying the patterns. Red pins marked U-boat positions, detected by Huff-Duff. Blue pins showed confirmed kills. The ratio between them had been improving steadily for 6 months. In January, they'd detected 50 U-boats and sunk 12. In May, 68 detections and 23 kills. Now in June, the numbers were even more dramatic. "They're transmitting less," Captain Dennis Ford Simmons reported, pointing to a chart showing average transmission times. January average was 32 seconds. May was 14 seconds. This month we're seeing transmissions under 10 seconds. Are we still getting good bearings? Excellent bearings. The shorter transmissions are actually cleaner, less atmospheric interference. Our operators can mark them in 2 to 3 seconds consistently. Horton nodded slowly. The Germans were responding to their losses by transmitting less, which made perfect sense from their perspective. But they didn't understand the fundamental problem. Huff-Duff wasn't about transmission length. It was about the fact of transmission itself. A 10-second signal was nearly as useful as a 30-second signal. Both gave precise bearings, both allowed for intercept. How many boats did Dönitz lose in May? 41 confirmed kills, highest monthly total of the war. And June? We're on track for 47, possibly 50. Horton pulled out a cigar but didn't light it, merely rolling it between his fingers as he thought. At that rate, the U-boat arm becomes unsustainable within 6 months. They can't replace experienced crews fast enough. Training suffers. Tactical coherence breaks down. Dönitz still has over 400 boats, Ford Simmons cautioned. He can sustain these losses for a while. But not forever, and more importantly, his captains are losing confidence. Horton moved closer to the map. Look at the patrol patterns. Six months ago, they were aggressive, positioning themselves along convoy routes, calling in wolf packs for coordinated attacks. Now, he gestured at the scattered red pins. They're tentative, cautious, afraid to transmit because transmission means death. We're breaking their will to fight. We're breaking their ability to coordinate, which amounts to the same thing. Horton finally lit his cigar, the smoke curling up toward the ventilation ducts. The U-boat threat isn't eliminated. But it's contained, and Huff-Duff is the primary reason why. In the corner of the room, a Huff-Duff operator sat at his station, headphones clamped over his ears, eyes fixed on the cathode display. The green trace jumped and settled. The operator made a note on his pad, then called out, "Contact, bearing 287 degrees, strength 4, duration 6 seconds." Another pin went onto the map. Another U-boat marked for death. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Detect, plot, attack, kill. 3 seconds to find them, minutes to destroy them. The cycle repeated dozens of times per day, hundreds of times per month. The Battle of the Atlantic wasn't over. But the tide had turned, and the weapon that turned it was invisible, silent, and faster than human thought. The last transmission, U-507, June 8th, 1943. Klaus Richter never made it home. On June 8th, 6 days after his encounter with HMS Starling, U-507 received orders to report to Grid Square, CF-42, for Wolfpack operations. The transmission would require 12 seconds. Richter compressed it to 8, removing every unnecessary character. He transmitted at 14 and 47 hours. HMS Biter's Huff-Duff detected the signal in 2.7 seconds. Swordfish aircraft were airborne within 6 minutes. They found U-507 still on the surface, diesels running, completely unaware of the trap closing around them. The first depth charges hit before U-507 could dive. The boat broke in half and sank in less than a minute. There were no survivors. 54 men, including Oberfunkmart Klaus Richter, died without ever knowing that their 8-second transmission had sealed their fate. The irony was perfect and complete. Richter had been right about everything. The Allies did have new technology. They could detect and locate transmissions in seconds. Every signal was a death sentence, but knowing the truth didn't save him. Couldn't save him, because submarines without radios were submarines without purpose, and the Germans had no choice but to keep transmitting, keep dying, keep feeding the mathematical machinery of their own destruction. The Final Balance, May 1945, BDU Headquarters, Flensburg, Germany. Admiral Dönitz sat in his office, surrounded by the wreckage of his U-boat command. Of the 1,162 U-boats commissioned during the war, 785 had been lost, 28,000 submariners dead, a casualty rate of 75%, higher than any other military service in any nation. The reports lay scattered across his desk, post-battle analyses, intelligence summaries, the accumulated evidence of technological defeat. And there, buried in a technical annex dated March 1944, was the truth he'd suspected, but never proven. High-frequency direction finding, HF-DF, Huff-Duff. Detection time, 2 to 4 seconds. Accuracy within 1 to 2 degrees. Effective range, 300+ nautical miles. Operational since January 1941. 4 years. For 4 years, every transmission from every U-boat had been detected, plotted and used to vector Allied forces toward the kill. The 20-second transmission limit hadn't mattered. The 15-second limit hadn't mattered. Even the desperate 8-second messages of 1943 hadn't made a difference. The technology was too fast, too accurate, too devastating. Dönitz read the technical description with the bitter appreciation of a chess master who'd finally seen his opponent's winning strategy. The Adcock array, phase difference detection, instantaneous bearing calculation. It was elegant, brutal, effective. He thought about the young radio operators, men like Klaus Richter, who died never knowing the enemy could hear them instantly, precisely, fatally. Men who'd followed doctrine, who'd trusted in their training, who'd believed that speed and caution could protect them. They'd been wrong, but the mistake wasn't theirs. It was his. The war was ending. Germany was collapsing. The U-boat arm was finished, and the weapon that killed it had been invisible, silent, and faster than lightning. "3 seconds. That's all it took to mark a submarine for death. 3 seconds to turn the hunter into the hunted. 3 seconds to change the entire balance of the Atlantic War." Dönitz closed the report and looked out the window at the grey Baltic Sea. Somewhere out there, the last U-boats were surrendering, surfacing with black flags to signal capitulation. The great underwater campaign was over. The technology that promised to strangle Britain had been strangled itself by a technology that turned every transmission into a tracer round, every message into a target marker. The radio operators had been told to keep transmissions under 20 seconds. The British needed only 3, and in that 17-second gap lay the difference between victory and defeat, between survival and extinction, between the longest battle of World War II and its ultimate conclusion. The mathematics had never lied. The physics had never changed. From the first transmission to the last, the equation remained constant. Detect, plot, attack, kill. 3 seconds to find them, minutes to destroy them, years to win the war. Huff-Duff, the invisible weapon, the 3-second death sentence. The technology that broke the U-boat arm and saved Britain from starvation. In the end, it wasn't the bravery of sailors or the skill of submariners that decided the Battle of the Atlantic. It was the cold, precise mathematics of electromagnetic waves, processed by cathode ray tubes and interpreted by trained operators who could read the invisible signature of a radio transmission and translate it into death. The Germans never stood a chance. They just didn't know it until it was far too late.